You're listening to the official podcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
We have begun in this season to engage what seems fitting of spring as a season, seems fitting coming out of our engaging of the death and resurrection of Jesus as we did at Easter, to engage this whole topic of faith and what is faith and why are we called to have faith and how do we have faith? How do we live out of this thing called faith? And if you're like me, faith is one of those, it's kind of an interesting word. I've often found it to be fascinating because it's probably one of those words that everyone likes. I mean, there's just a general likability about faith, you know? And it draws us in as something good, something positive, something uplifting, something we need. But it draws us, and yet it eludes us probably as much as any word. Because if you were to say, so what is faith? We'd all be I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what it looks like. I'm not quite sure how to grasp it or define it. And it's so important for us, I think, to be engaged in this whole question of faith. And I think faith has this general sense in even our culture right now. When we use this term, on one hand, we use it to encourage. And if you had a friend who was down, you might say, hey, have faith. It's going to work out. You know, and you'd be speaking and encouraging faith because faith somehow says there's something bigger. There's something bigger at hand, and you need to connect to that. On the other hand, when we use the word faith right now, there's a lot of tension that can rise up because in our current culture in particular, there seems to be this tension between faith and reason, or faith and science in particular. And so we speak of, reason versus faith, but in a kind of a negative sense. The idea that somehow faith is secondary to reason. There's blind faith, and it's not a particularly positive way in which we think of faith when we think of it in light of reason. And I think it's very important for us, and as we think of faith and what God's calling us to recognize that and ask the question, really, is there that inherent tension? And we don't have time to unpack that today, but I want to say briefly, I don't think that the scriptures tell us about a faith that is an inherent tension at all with reason or science. Not at all. You find none. What I do think we find is that there's something we can bring as people that we associate with science or faith and our journeys of knowledge and knowing and all of those big questions. There we can find certainly some very real tensions. The fact is, and the truth is, as we're going to see in terms of faith, faith is really an invitation to what is the larger realm of the seen. There's the seen and there's the unseen. And we have always, as humanity, always, there's nothing new. We have been people who have wanted to understand the natural realm. I kind of want to figure out this stuff, It'd be good to know, how is it I breathe? It'd be good to know, how is that stuff grows from the ground? Because if I could figure it out, maybe I can get some of that stuff and put it in there and get more of that stuff. We want to know the natural world by which we're surviving. So to engage the natural realm, to understand things that can help us has always been vital, but humanity has always been equally engaged with the idea, but that doesn't mean that's all there is. How do I understand reality? What all is involved in reality is there's the seen and there's the unseen, and we've always been drawn to the mystery of that. And so this isn't a new tension to think of the seen, the unseen, the measurable and the mysterious. Those have always been things that we engage. I think what we find is that we've got to work out our own human tendencies as we come to those in ways, and I think that we have found that over in the past, there was a time in which everybody saw the world as somehow there must be some capricious gods up there. We can't understand it. So life is random. There's some gods that are playing games, and we're just a part of their game. Actually, so nobody expected much. Everyone wanted to understand the natural world, but there must be limits because it's crazy. And it was actually in part, and some of you know this through history, by the revelation of what we believe is the living God, making himself known to us, to say, I am a God who created intentionally. There is not some random world going back here, but I'm a God of goodness and a God of order. And out of that, especially Western civilization kind of gets rooted in that and rises up, and the sciences flourish. Why? Because they're rooted in the idea of order, that there is order. It is good. It is intentional. So you should go looking for it. You should go in and try to understand it and master it and work it. It's part of the good that God has put into the world and into the experience of humanity and all of creation. And so the sciences flourish under that. Wow, we can find order. We can find laws. We can find consistency. We can measure things. But there's a shift that begins to kind of emerge, and this is very simplistic, and forgive me for that, but I think it speaks to our hearts. There's a shift that begins to emerge, kind of the Enlightenment, where suddenly we don't just have reason, we can reason anything. We're amazing. And there's kind of getting an enamored. Wow, it's not wow, we can measure some stuff. It's wow, we can measure everything. And if we can't measure it, contain it, and control it, then we don't like it. Because the only thing that matters now is what we can measure, contain, and control. And there's almost this growing sense that if we can't master it and we can't control it, then it's something to be overcome. It's like an enemy of our reason, our ingenuity, as opposed to it actually might be bigger than we are. And so you've got this kind of this kind of dynamic in which all of a sudden it's the seen world versus the unseen world. They can't both be real, and it's like, why? There's not attention to this. One might actually help explain the other. Now suddenly they almost are made out to be at odds. And so I would posit to you that there is not so much an inherent tension as much as there is larger questions of what is real, how do we know reality, and how do these two things relate? And so there are those who would say that we can know everything and we can grasp it all. There are no limits, and so only that which I can measure is real. And there are those who kind of can find the other way and say, you know what? There's something so wrong with human nature's idea that it can master and control and define and contain everything. So they look at faith and spiritual things as the only thing that matters. And they kind of look down upon everything of the material world as negative, as unreal, as an illusion. And here's the reality of Scripture, and I hope you just find this to be a helpful reminder. Nowhere in the Scriptures are we told that one of these judges the other. We're never told that one is better than the other. We're never told by Jesus that the whole physical world is just an illusion and the only thing that matters is the unseen spiritual. He never says that. He eats food and enjoys it. He actually says it's a wonderful world that we live in. It's wonderful. And it comes from God. The seen comes from the unseen. That's the reality that the Scriptures tell us. And that's what faith, I think, ends up helping us to grasp. And so it is that another way to say it is if someone wanted to know you, would they know you by knowing you only physically? They take you apart, they figure out everything in terms of molecularly and what it is and what you're made up of. Would they know you? You're probably going, no, don't dissect me. I saw it. I did the rat in lab class, and it wasn't pretty. No, you'd say they don't know me as a person. Can you really be known only physically, or are you also a person? To be known, there is more than merely the material or the physical. To be known, there is something larger at hand. There's the measurable, the immeasurable. And that, I think, the invitation. And so we read, as we launched into last week, the book of Hebrews comes to this point to say God has made himself known in amazing ways, but nothing is like how God's met us in Christ, superior to all things. And it's by that we engage life of faith. And if you want an example of faith, look to those who didn't even know as much as you know. Look back to those. He stops at this point and says, because they have faith and you need faith and we should live by faith. And this is where we pick up. And we saw here in chapter 11, verses 1 through 3 and 6, where he says, now faith, he stops and says, now faith is what? Being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for, those who went far before you, those who God first made himself known to. It was by faith that we understand that the universe, everything we're measuring, was formed at God's command. It came forth. He is person, we are persons. He brought this goodness forth. So that what is seen was not made by what was visible. The visible world we see now is not the source of the invisible. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And what do we find there? Are there words there telling us you need faith because the unseen world is bad? No, he never says. He doesn't judge one or the other. He just merely says, do you understand that there is an unseen world, and faith is that which engages that unseen world. And by that you join the unseen world, which is that source of God. Or to put it this way, we could say faith is the power by which we access and honor the larger realm and role of God, and therefore can join the will and the work of God. And therefore, it shouldn't surprise us that God says, this is what pleases him. The only way we can please God is if we engage in the will and work of him who's working. It's like if someone says, I'm going to run things here. Oh, I know you created it, but you don't exist. And now I'm going to run it my own way. There's just no way that you're going to be joining up with the goodness of God and the will and work of God. So by faith, we access this realm. And by faith, we can engage the will and wow, okay, I get your will, and I see you at work, and I'm joining that. And it says, we're told, faith is what God looks for. When he returns, he's looking for us to be people who have that faith, who are engaged in it, who are accessing that larger realm and role of God in the world. And that's what we are called out to. And that's why it says it's so important for us to get down and realize you have a source of everything. I noticed earlier that we had a little bit of a technology thing going on here. The screen was going crazy. Somehow you couldn't even power off this projector over here. And some of you over here probably noticed it. And we're having quite a bit of a distraction there. And the thing just kept spinning and going through some cycle. I don't know if anyone caught what it was saying underneath. Anybody catch that? It was stuck in a cycle, and underneath it told you what it was trying to do. It said, searching for a source. I think that's a prophetic word, not just for you, this side of the room. I don't think so. I don't think it's a personal thing. But searching for source. That's who we are. That is really the challenge I think God has for us, is where are we in terms of searching for and grasping a source. And if we don't get it right, we just unplug you. No, I'm kidding. Like we did the projector. No, God's heart, though, is for us to hear that is a question for us too. And so we come to that of looking back, and we ask the question, well, what does faith look like? What does it mean to live out of this place in which we believe and engage that larger role? Because for some of us, we can think faith is weird. People who walk by faith are just weird, and perhaps there is a weirdness that we have to engage in life. But what's it really mean? Does it mean we don't have reason? No, I think it means we live by reason and with reason, but we transcend reason as well. What does it mean that we live by faith? What's it look like? He says, if you want to see what real faith in real life looks like, look to those who walked before you. So he says there, this is what the ancients were commended for. Oh, I get it. But they didn't know very much. They didn't know very much, yes, and they walked in this. And so what we're doing is we're going to be taking a look at some of these lives of faith from the past, because number one, they help capture for us what faith actually looks like in real life. And see, our problem is our tendency is to say, well, there are heroes of the faith. These lives, they're just so epic, they're so amazing. They understood so much of God, and they were just so unique and distinct. No, they weren't. The whole point of this text, the whole point of where he goes in this chapter, is to say, wait. You actually know more of God's plan than they do. We think, oh no, God showed them the whole blueprint. He showed them everything he was doing, and so they joined it. No, actually they knew very little of what God was doing. These are people who had to walk in utter confusion. They had to walk in beyond understanding. This is really hard stuff. And we look to them, he says, because we now see the unfolding of God's plan in Christ, coming to redeem the world, coming to fulfill what he began. We have all that, he says. They didn't have that. The ancients, they had to just look for things they never saw the fulfillment of, and yet they had faith. Why? Because they stepped out in what they did know. That's their story. What they did know, they had to wrestle with and step out. And they capture the reality of faith when you don't know things. We're going to discover lives over the next few weeks, lives who you look at them and you think, wow, they didn't understand very much. They had to step out way beyond their understanding. Do you think when Noah built an ark, he's going, I know what you're going to do. He's like, no, I have no idea what you're going to do. It makes no sense. Do you think they had to wrestle with popularity? Like, they had a whole cheering section, right? No, Noah had nobody. Nobody was there saying this makes any sense. And you wrestle with things where you go, it just doesn't really make sense. It seems crazy. And I don't know what to do with that. These are lives who walked in that. These are lives who had to walk in things they felt were confused. Oh, God, I know what you're going to do. And then it doesn't unfold the way they think or would naturally seem. Like, if God's in this, he's going to certainly do it this way, isn't he? And he's not. What do I do with that? Am I wrong? Am I foolish? Is my life making no sense now? These are the things they wrestle with. These are the things where we're going to see how faith navigates those things and finds itself rooted and finds itself succeeding and finds itself, in that sense, heroic. But they are not heroic because of somehow being better than us. Actually, they capture just stepping out in the real thing. They not only capture it, but they also call us to faith in real life. They call us into that, to join that reality of living faith and engaging the spiritual and eternal realm that we are connected to, that we are part of her, that's in our personhood, that's supposed to be part of our story. They invite us into that. It's like if we were to see this as somehow a list of lives in this chapter that's like a plaque. You know how the plaque at school, and it has all the people who were the heroes or any other plaque. This perpetual plaque, guess what? It's got room for your name. It's got room for my name. It is not finished. It's inviting us to join that reality. That's why I don't call this series Heroes of Faith, because I don't want us to be like those who go, I am just so inspired by them, like past tense. They're not here to inspire you here. They're here to call us. They're here to beckon us into that reality of faith. By the way they stepped out, let us learn how to step in reality. And so it is that the writer takes this up, and he begins, and we're going to be looking at a lot of these lives, like, the epic ones like Abraham and Noah and Moses and some others. But we really begin with one whom we gain so little about in terms of background. We're not told much because he reaches all the way back to the very first named descendants of Adam and Eve, and that is Abel. He speaks of Abel. And Abel and his brother Cain, you might remember something of that story right from the beginning. And we see Cain get listed. And here he speaks in Hebrews 11:4. It says, it was by faith, now telling us by faith what one of these people did and why we should look at it. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering. So something of faith caused him to bring a more appropriate offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man. Somehow the way he brought and what he brought something that showed that he had something right. And God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. He is living, he is beckoning. So the first one that we're told of is Abel. And Abel gives us this example of one who I think how faith can lead us to rightfully move out, step out, move forward, expand our lives in terms of people who worship. And we see in Genesis 4 the story where we read, going back to the first account, when it was time for the harvest, or some translations just say in the process of time, as we don't really know much about these guys at this point or anything else, but when the time was right of these two, it says Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, his brother, the best of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. And later we're told because something was very wrong in Cain's heart. And I think that emerges when we begin to see it. It said this made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. So we're told very little here about how Abel and Cain knew much of God. We're not sure what they knew of God. We're not sure how they were gained any idea about worship, but obviously they did. And so they bring these offerings. And we have to assume then that the core of their bringing it was because something in them said, God is merely worthy of this. That it is just fundamentally, we have goodness, and we want to take from the goodness of what we have and offer it back and say thank you, and kind of honor the source of that goodness. There's a sense that Abel would remind us that's just a proper posture. I'm not trying to get something out of you. I'm not trying to work the gods. It doesn't appear that he's trying to work God up for anything. He's not playing a game. It's just that's what you do. When there's a source of goodness, you honor the source of the goodness by bringing your best to it. So the first thing we think we learn from is that faith honors God as the source and center of all things. It honors him as that. It says, anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly that seek him, and that he is the source of all of these things. And this is the essence of really what worship is. Worship is giving worth to what holds worth, to what is rightful to bear that worth. And our word worship, as I've mentioned before, comes from the Old English word worthship. So when you hear worship, you think of nothing but singing. But it is a much more dynamic thing than that. That is the expression of worship. But worship means worthship. You give worth to something. And here he is saying that fundamentally my life is going to choose to give worth to the source of all things. And this is what you see coming forth from Abel. And it appears to come forth from Cain. He also brings an offering. But you start to discover something of a little bit of a difference here. Because when Cain doesn't get what he wants, all of a sudden things start to change. And when God says, oh, that's great, but I need to confront some things about your own heart. There's something in the way of what you're bringing that is not really right. And you see this jealousy rise up in Cain. And all of a sudden, Cain is angry at Abel for no fair reason. God even says, why are you angry at your brother? He just did what's right, Just get right yourself. But that's not it. Things just get worse. Pretty soon he's defiant with God. What is going on? This is not a heart. This is not a heart who sincerely is saying, God, you are my great worth. This is somebody who just was going through the motions, figured that they should do it obligatory, or thought that he should get something from God. And God, as long as you make me feel good about myself, but you're not. You didn't affirm my offering. You didn't give me what you gave Abel. And now I'm angry because God's worth is not the center of his life. It's not that pure for him. And we need to check our hearts too. John Wimber, who was the kind of father and founder of our Vineyard movement of churches, I remember often John would say, as he would have people come up to him as a pastor, and they'd come up to him and say, oh, my pastor, I've been coming for 2 or 3 weeks here, and I love your church, and you're my pastor. You're my pastor. And he'd say, oh, okay, well, it's nice to meet you. We'll see the first time I have to say no. It's a great line. In other words, don't jump to conclusions that I'm your pastor. We'll find out when maybe I have to say, we're not going to do things your way. Or maybe there's something to confront. And then it becomes clear if I'm your pastor. And I think there's some wisdom in that. Parents feel that too sometimes. Like, your kids are all supportive of some idea, but they've got an agenda there. And if we don't do it that way, it's like, what? Wait a minute. And all of a sudden, they're part of the rebel group, We're not going on that trip or whatever. There's all of a sudden you go, wait a minute. I thought you were honoring me as your father, or honoring me as your mother, but all of a sudden it's like you're honoring me what? Because and to the degree that it serves you. That's what's going on for Cain. That's what we have to ask ourselves. See, worship begins by coming to the place in which I realize, look, I don't understand everything. I don't understand everything about reality of God, but I do believe God exists, and I believe that he's good. And that, therefore, he is the greatest worth there is. He just is. That's just good, proper human nature. That is what one does when they finally say, it's not all about me. I'm not the beginning and end, and nobody else is. I believe there is a source. I think they've made themselves known. I don't understand it all. But if God's real, then he deserves to be the greatest worth and to see and experience my worth in everything that I do. And that's what we see there that seems to be enabled. We have to come to that place. And then he goes on, and what does he do? It says that Cain brings some of his. Cain is a farmer, so Cain brings some of his goods as an offering. But it says of Abel that he brings what? He brings the best. Or it's the implication, some translate, from the idea that he brought one of the firstborn. the firstborn and the best of the fat of the sacrifice as a shepherd. And he brings that to God, saying, God, we are going, and it might think, oh, that's horrible, but they're all killing animals that are a part of their own food source. And he's saying, I'm just bringing this one to honor you. We're in part living off of this, and this is part of life and the world you gave us, and I'm bringing the best of that, to you to kind of just be honorable, to say, wow, there's goods in this world, and I need to honor you with that. But he brings kind of the best, and you start to see this difference where he's saying, no, this really matters, and if it really matters and you have the worth, then I bring the very best of whatever I have in his time, his treasure, his talent, he brings to God. And I think this is very helpful to us to realize that there is this concreteness in our lives. When people look at us, do they look at your time, your treasure, your talent, and say, wow, I see what you give value to. I see what you hold up and what really defines your life. This was defining to him, his choices, and bringing the best. He seems to put God forward into that place. And I think it's helpful for us to realize that worship, what we give worth to, and the giving of worth is more than singing, but it's very much a part of and connected to it and what we express with our hearts. And the truth is, we kind of know this in life, but this is a good reminder right here. The truth is, if you were to say, somebody's really important to me, let's say that you're married and your spouse would really want to hear, you're really important to me. Do they want to hear it said, or do they want to see it shown? Both. You're like, whoops. Both ultimately. I've seen it ultimately to be there. Those who just, say it and don't show it, we say what? Words are cheap. Words are cheap. It's too easy. I need you to show it. But come on, women, you know this to be true. But if you have some guy, I took care of that, I know I never tell you that you're good, but, I never tell you. You're saying, well, go ahead and tell me. I want to hear it. I want to hear the heart. Because the heart expresses itself. It does not just act. It does not just act. There is something in the heart that is. So we need to express and we need to declare. And we need to learn to kind of let our hearts rise up and express themselves to God, but our lives show the worth of God in our lives. Show and tell. That both of these things, that's the human heart. And the question that we see, though, from Abel that reminds us is, what do our lives tell? If people, would people look at our lives and go, man, I can just tell by the way that you use your treasures, your talent, and your time, it is so clear that your life is defined by God having the greatest worth in your life above everything else. I don't know if they would. For me, I don't know. There are times where I am too consumed by other things, but I get too far into something. And it's like, wow, I've been thinking so much or worrying so much or investing so much. I don't know that my life declares the worthship of God. And that is a challenge that we see so clearly as this emerges for Abel. Now, I don't think it's merely a matter of more. He gave the first. He gave the best. It's not always simply a matter of more. It's not simply to be manipulated so that it's like if you have more faith, you'd give more money, more of your time, more of your talent to the church. I think that's very simplistic. I think there's a connection, and I think some of us can get very casual about what we bring it all to God, showing up and caring and valuing and investing and being a part. I think that matters a whole lot, and I think this should speak to some of us. But I think it's simplistic and manipulative to say that it's simply a matter of more money, more time. Because I think that there's a quality where it is that God says, I want everything you do in life, it says, do unto the Lord. Everything. So what's the quality by which you do everything? Do you do it with greatness? Do you value God and His glory in the midst of everything you do? It's not just a matter of the more. It's a matter of the best. I think the challenge for us is, or does God get leftovers? That's what you don't see in Abel. You don't sense that he had the leftovers. He took the first. He took the risky stuff. He took the stuff that he had thought about the most, not the least. I remember reading it, and it's a true story because they were sharing it off. It came off the internet, so I know it's true. And was somebody who sent in, they were sending a question at Thanksgiving to one of the places that like was taking turkey, helps you know how to cook a turkey and all those kind of things. And they said like, okay, I'm trying to understand the expiration date, about this thing. And they kind of confirmed, no, it's past its expired date. And the person wrote back, good, because I was thinking I'll go ahead and donate it to the church then. Donate it to the poor. Donate it to our Thanksgiving event where it would serve the poor because it's expired. And I thought, wow, it sounds so wrong, but I really wonder if I don't kind of give the leftovers, the stuff that I think, oh, good. I'm glad I have something that'll make me feel good. I give a little bit extra. It won't cost me anything. I couldn't use it anyways. And I get to hold on to more. That's not able. And it challenges us. Where is your worth? Is it the leftovers or is it the best? Is it the best? Is it the first? Would someone look at your calendar, your checkbook, and say, oh, I know what you value most? It challenges us. And thirdly, faith embraces the humility of standing before God's mercy. The thing that's so striking here, I think, about Abel is that he comes as one who seems to have no sense that he deserves anything. Out of Cain we see that, but Abel comes with a sacrifice. He's like, man, I deserve death, and he brings this. And we don't know how much Abel understood that his offering needed to be a sacrifice. We don't know. We don't want to overly read. There's a lot of different thoughts about it. But there seems to be a humility, and there certainly seems to be something prophetic about the fact that he comes saying, I don't stand right with you. I don't presume to stand right with you. I need to come before you in all of your mercy, who comes to meet me. So he brings this burnt offering, this sacrifice. And we are told in so many ways how that is all the more profound for us who come merely to the mercy of God, for whom Jesus now, and God comes and brings the final sacrifice. And the blood of Jesus, far more than the blood of Abel, the scriptures tell us specifically, that is the greater blood. That is how we come. We come as those who stand before God in mercy. And we come with the humility to say, I don't deserve anything. And what's most challenging is when we look at Cain, we go, something's very wrong there. And that bit of wrong can get real close to home. Because what does Cain do? He says, I do deserve something. And I'm really angry. And he starts to get very defiant. You didn't do it my way, God. And you see it start to escalate. And pretty soon it's like, hey, Cain, just do what's right. And what does Cain go off and do? Go, you're right, God, I'm sorry. I need to get my life straightened out. You are the center of all things. No, you didn't do it my way. So he takes his brother for a walk. You remember that walk? Yeah. Cain says, hey, Abel, let's go for a walk. And there, his jealousy so consumes him that it says in a moment he rises up and he looks at that goodness and he kills and strikes down his brother Abel. And God comes to him and says, what have you done? And right there you think right there, once again he's at that crossroads. What does he do? Does he say, God, I can't believe what I've done. I should be so humble at this point. And in humility say, I'm out of control? No. Remember what he says? Who is my brother? Or am I my brother's keeper? This defiant line he says to God, am I my brother's keeper? You know God's answer, by the way? Yes, you were. You are responsible for what you did. And you can't take responsibility for your life. See how much he's lost what? Humility. And sometimes we just think we can defy God, and when we do, we're just losing humility. But Abel seems to have no agenda, and we need to be those who come with that same spirit to say, wow, how much more God has done, how much more he's met me in the mercy of himself coming and his own sacrifice of Christ for me. How do I stand before that mercy? I take it in and stand humbly and say, wow, you are worthy. You got my heart. You got my heart. Look at what you've done. You got my heart. You got my life. You got the best of me. And that's what we're invited into as people who give worship. That's what faith beckons us into. As we're told, and we read in the psalmist, right, God does not delight in sacrifice. God does not take pleasure in burnt offerings, but rather what's beneath them, what would come from them. The sacrifices of God are what? A broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. Oh God, you will not despise this. What is God ultimately looking for? Not merely some external sacrifice. Hey God, I did this for you, now you do it for me. No, it's one who says, I am broken, I deserve nothing. I do not come as one demanding. I'm not coming to try to sit there and be equals on terms. No, I have a broken spirit. Now, some of us might say, I don't want a broken spirit. That sounds like you're saying guilt-ridden people, people who are just heavy with guilt. Far from it. This is not describing, the broken spirit is not describing somebody who suddenly goes, oh, I have to carry all this unnecessary guilt. No, it's the person who says, afraid I got some guilt, afraid I'm not perfect, and guess what I got? Freedom from it. Because when I know that I do have flaws and I can deal with them because God's merciful, I'm free to stand up and live as a person who's not guilt-ridden, I'm mercy-ridden. I'm carrying the mercy of God and I have freedom. You can try to suppress, you want your whole life, you can spend all the energy you want trying to suppress that there are parts of you that are not what they should be. Good luck with it. You will get older and you will find it harder. That's guilt-ridden. The person who says, you know what, there are parts of, I don't know what to do with elements. I feel I can't cut them off. I can't say, I don't know. Oh, God meets me in those. God has come to me if I'm humble and admit that. That's guilt freedom, not guilt-ridden. That is one who can live and still live with reality and face those things. That's where God wants to meet us. That is the person of humility who says, wow, okay. It's kind of like when, people talk about trying to, break a horse, It's not that there's something, inherently bad about the strength of a horse, by the way. But if one's trying to tame it, they talk about trying to kind of break its spirit because its wildness is not going to allow them to have a good relationship. So one tames them so they can. So God is saying some of us, our defiant spirit with God, who wants to be wild in our own thing, needs to be broken and needs to come and say humbly, I need you. And this is where I close with these words of Paul speaking to the church in Rome and to us when he writes these words, therefore, about faith and about how to live. And he says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of what? In view of God's mercy. In view of God's mercy, just as Abel did, to offer what? To offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. Your whole being, not just your physical being, but your physical and your whole personhood. Offer it all as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship, that you bring yourself. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, which thinks that it rules and it reigns and it's the center. Do not conform to that pattern, but be transformed by the renewing your mind, which knows that we lay our lives before God. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. Then you'll get to realize it's not all about your will. There's something better. And if we're smart, we come to a point where it's like my will, God's will. I want my will, but I trust His will way more than my own. I hope you come to that point where you kind of realize there's a better will than your own. God's will, His what? Good and pleasing and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought to, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the measure of what? Faith that God's given you. If God has given you an element of faith to believe, then step out on what you believe. Keep God in the picture. When you keep God in the picture, you can yourself have a clear sense about who you are. You won't think more highly and you won't think despair. You will think clearly about who you are and how you walk in this world. But I think the challenge to us is to be those who really search our hearts and say, do I fundamentally, like Abel, do I really have a sense of God's worth at the center of our things? Or do I just think that it's really, I don't know, if God adds to my life and can make me feel better and get rid of a little bit of guilt feelings, then I guess that's what it's all about. That's Cain. And when it didn't work out that way in the moment, he goes crazy. So will you. You will not continue to live the life of faith. Faith says, no, God is the creator and He is good. And I'm all in. And I rest in that. I trust in that. I have faith in that. And I'm going to live trying to lean in, trying to follow that dynamic in life and see what God does. Amen? Let's stand and would you pray with me? I feel like for some of us, you're just searching. Every one of us at some level is just The honest truth is, God has shown you something He hasn't shown me, and He's shown me things. In other words, if I said, how do you know God's real? What's He made known of Himself? You'd say, I've read the scriptures. It's real. Like it just comes alive, and it just bears witness. You might say, I had this experience in life. Okay, we all have different experiences. My challenge to you is, maybe you say, I don't even know what I believe yet. Will you dare, as we start this journey, to say, I will ask God to make Himself real? And secondly, I will actually do so sincerely and openly. Because I think at the end of the day, the bigger question is not whether we believe in God, it's whether we want to believe in God. See, I'm not sure a lot of us want God to be real. Do you want God to be real? That's a deeper question. So ask yourself sincerely. Would you even ask now, between you and God, because this has to be, I'm not going to speak it for you. I feel like you just say it in your heart. God, just make yourself real. I'm going to invite you to do that in your own heart. God, I just pray that you would help our own hearts and conversations with you. God, I just feel like a lot of us really know that we're a little bit like Cain. We're kind of doing the religious thing, but I don't know if we really understand that where we're placing our worth. And it probably shows in our hearts sometimes. And we just pray you'd forgive us. And we do ask in our own ways now, would you just, God, help us to settle and center ourselves and shape our lives, define them by that great worth. So we pray that you would reveal yourself afresh and in new ways to us, to our minds, to our hearts, to all we see, to all we sense within ourselves. We pray that faith would arise within us. We might walk in it all of our days. You might help us when we don't understand things to walk with what we do understand. Let's worship together.